So my name is Kevin Cusson. I am one member of the LiteFarm team, which at this point consists of dozens of people that are staff, open source contributors, scientists, farmers, etc., on every continent. So LiteFarm is a free and open source technology. It's funded by grants and donations. The primary focus, the mission that we have with LiteFarm is to make a public good for farmers all around the world, right? So we're looking for all kinds of partnerships and folks that can kind of help us with this mission. And that's part of the reason I'm excited to be here, part of the Living Lab, to speak with all the expertise in the room, right? My job in general is to not know a lot of things, but to know a lot of people that know a lot of things, and then be able to take their expertise and kind of condense it into a form that's generally understood by the public. So if there's one way to think about LiteFarm, you might think of it as that. So I took over the LiteFarm project at the beginning of 2020. Before that, the co-founders were Hannah Whitman and Zia Marabi, who's now at University of Colorado. And they had built a tool to essentially understand practices on farms. I took that strategy and I tweaked it a little bit, right? So what I've noticed, as a newcomer to agriculture, is that there are a lot of tools out there that are very, very powerful, but they're very powerful within a narrow slice, right? They have a very narrow focus on what exactly they do. And if you need that power, it's a great tool, but that it's sometimes hard to approach, or at least it was hard to approach from my perspective coming into the sector. So what I said is, okay, let's tweak this a little bit. Rather than building a tool that's very good at extracting information on a very narrow subset, let's build a tool that's very, very easy to approach, that you get a lot of value out of as you're using it, right? So rather than a reporting tool, let's create a tool where you get value from using it, and then as a byproduct, we get some reporting if that's what the user wants, right? So we focused exclusively on the needs of the farmer. We listened to them and said, what are the things that you need? How can we make your life better, right? So you'll see as we go through some of the screens that they're all very simple. It's meant to be so. We're trying to limit the amount of choices at any given screen. We're trying to make the information that's shown very simple, actionable, so that we're not kind of scaring people away with complexity or the power. Right, so one example is when I joined the project on the left, this was the first screen that you would see as a farmer. What's the name of your farm? What's the address? Do you use metric? Do you use what's the currency where you live? Right? We simplified that, said what's the name of your farm, and then they can, many of you are probably familiar with this, just go to my location. They can do that. In which case all they have to do is enter the farm. And then we can deduce what units they're using. Canada being an exception because Canadians love imperial and metric about different things in the same sentence. So a little complicated there. But most countries, we can deduce things like the system of measure and the currency. The second thing is, and this is from talking to a lot of farmers, we got to help them make a living, right? Like I've heard this over and over again. We're asking farmers to do these things. How do we get them to do it, right? And from my perspective, I have a much easier calculus than the folks in the room, right? Like I can understand what they want, and I don't have these other kind of side goals that say, okay, well, we need to increase the amount of carbon in the soil, or we need to do this, or we need to do that. I can just deliver on that thing, right? So building value, especially making farming more financially viable. So a lot of the features that we built are around that focus as well. And kind of to the idea of accessibility and usability, LiteFarm is not going to do everything. The way that I think about it is as an on-ramp into a highway system where all of these much more powerful tools are out there. So we're not building greenhouse gas calculators, but we want to integrate with greenhouse gas calculators, right? We're not recommending nutrient management plans, but we'd like to be able to take the data that farmers are already entering and push that out to a system that does that very well, right? So we want to be the on-ramp into an ecosystem of services. And that's part of kind of what open source is all about. Oh, and this is a little bit of a mystery. You don't know what the third one is. But we want to connect farmers with experts, right? People like you, the folks in the room. We want to be that connector, right? That on-ramp into the ecosystem, so that they can improve their practices, their operations, their outcomes. Oh, and again, we have a little bit more. So, when I joined the project at the beginning of 2020, we had a handful of partners in DC that had adopted and were using the software. These numbers are actually a little bit out of date. I ran some queries this morning. We're now in 137 countries. We have a little over 3,000 farms that have adopted the software. And in a given month, anywhere from about 100 to about 250 farms will adopt the software. Any guesses here on what countries we've done advertising in? Throw a number out there. Zero. Kind of. Yeah. We've spent money on advertising in one country, that's Canada. We have partnerships in about a dozen countries, depending on how you classify partnerships. So the vast majority, about 120 countries at least, has been totally organic, pardon the pun, growth. And like when I've delved into this, typically what we'll see is we'll have like a random farm in Gujarat, in India, and then I'll check back a month later and there'll be 5 farms in that, in that area. Then I'll check back a month later and there'll be 20, right? So I imagine, I don't have data on this, but I imagine that it's kind of over the fence post conversations, right? And for me, that's like the biggest validation is that we've built something that is useful. Many of these people never contact us. Some of them do. Some of them say, great job. And then it's always followed by a list of, but you could be doing this better, which is great. So what I wanted to talk about today is essentially how LiteFarm supports farmers and researchers today, so kind of your current state. Then I'd like to talk about our priorities over the next year. What's on our roadmap? What are we building? What do we have funding to build? And then some ideas around collaboration, right? So if you have something that you're really excited about and right now LiteFarm doesn't do it, let's talk. We can put together a plan to achieve that, I think. So the first thing is that LiteFarm supports multi-farm access. So there's different roles. You can be a farm owner, a farm manager, farm worker, extension officer, validation officer, etc. And we have certain countries, especially in low resource environments where you don't have internet access at the home, where an extension officer will be the one that's logging into LiteFarm, right? And they'll be supporting 30 different farmers and they'll call up on WhatsApp and say, hey, what's going on? And then they'll enter the data on behalf of the farmer, right? So this is what it looks like when you want to switch between farms. Farmers can actually do this for each other's operations if they want. They can invite an authentication officer for temporary access while they're doing, an organic survey or something to that effect. Right, so multi-farm access.
They can fill it offline, and then when they get to the internet access, it can be automatically uploaded.
No, so right now, LiteFarm is only online. It's on the roadmap to become offline.
I worked on a similar program before. So when the people go and fill out the assessment or the survey, wherever, so they can fill it offline and wherever the device is connected to the internet.
No,
automatically.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that, but LiteFarm doesn't support that today. And these are some of our more professional slides. This is what we showed to farmers, to certification organizations, to farmer groups. But essentially, we have a crop catalog. We default to about 375 crops that farmers can pick from. We've got a lot of data points kind of behind the scenes. I think about 11,000, anywhere from like max rooting depth to, calories per 100 grams, etc. But farmers can also add their own crops and they can add their own varietals. So I think at last check, we have about 1,800 different crop types that farmers have added to the system. We're pretty popular in Brazil. where there's huge biodiversity in agroforestry operations. So we've had a lot of feedback from those partners to kind of build out the crops. As you can see on the right there, we've got the little leaf icon. We support organic certification. In BC, we use the iCertify standard, if anyone's familiar with that. But essentially, at the end of the day, we can produce certification documents for crop operations. Management plans. So this is the idea of like, what are the things you need to do to, from seeding to harvest for your crop in a given year. So we can handle annuals and perennials. Within each plan, you can have any number of tasks. So you might have a transplant task, you might have a pest control, you might have scouting, you might have a harvest. And then there's notifications that are attached to these tasks as well. So instead of having an after the fact, like what did you do? Documented for researchers, documented for your certification, whatever. The farmers are getting value out of this because they're creating the task. They assign it to someone that's working on their farm. That person completes the task, says, okay, I did it. Here's some notes. I hated this. I'm going to give it 1 star out of 5. And then their payroll information is based on completing that task, right? So within the system, there's kind of self-reinforcing quality. The farmer is doing it so that they can take care of the things that need to happen. The worker is doing it so that they can get paid correctly for their labor. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead a little bit. So here's tasks, and you can see on the right there, when I'm completing it, I can say it took me this long. I liked it, I didn't like it. I can say, oh, I saw some aphids on the potato plant. We should get someone out here to take care of that type of thing. And then we've got some like overarching indicators at the farm level that are aggregating some of this data in an anonymous fashion so that the farm owner, if they have a lot of workers, they can understand what things are enjoyed, what things are not. And you'll have to believe me that on the right side there, that's what you're looking at, right? So for each of the tasks that people did, you can see the kind of the average happiness, the satisfaction with that task. Similarly, in the middle, you can see different crop plans have been rated. This is one of the big things that producers ask for. Like, I want to be able to look historically at how I did something, and I want to understand like what worked out well and what didn't, right? So they can compare past seasons to their present, especially for diversified growers, and understand, oh yeah, it was that variety. That was the really successful one. We support detailed economic data. So on the right side there is kind of our most high level. So whole farm, what are your expenses, labor, and other? What is your revenue, both estimated and actuals? And then at the bottom, you get your whole farm balance to understand how you're looking on the year. Right, and that'll kind of update as your actuals, your expected become actuals. Yeah. Oh, and yeah, maybe an important thing. So this is being captured on an ongoing basis as farmers are documenting sales and expenses. So this isn't an after the fact where it's like, how much did you spend? How much did you make? Where someone's having to recall or dig through manila envelopes. This is real data, right? The forecast is made when a crop plan is created, and then as the sales take place, more of that moves over from the forecasted into the actuals. Documents, pretty basic feature, but farmers can upload documents. It's stored on our server, they can classify it, and then that becomes part of their export for their organic or other certification. So if you've ever used like a receipt application where you're capturing it for your work as a work expense, you can take a picture of a receipt, upload it, classify it as a receipt, and then if you want that to be part of your certification export, you can. Another big thing that we do with this is just compliance information. So proving that your seeds were organic, for example, if you're an organic operation. And then here's the documentation. So the things we provide in the documentation export is your farm map, all of your inputs, all of your seeds, and then anything that, and then locations. So all the locations on your farm, what has active crops, what's organic status and what's not. And then one of the neater features that we have is we have an integration with an open source survey platform called SurveyStack, where if your certifying body wants to collect additional information, we can just link that up. They own that. And then in LiteFarm, you can get shown the survey questions. So that might be particularly relevant for this group, where you could create a survey that you want to go out to a specific group of farmers and then push it and they get a notification. It could be one question, it could be 10, and then that's saved and becomes part of both your side of things, the data analysis side, and then also part of their documentation as well. Oh, I'm gonna have to move it again for this one because, as you might know, a lot of the farms in British Columbia are in the south. But this is our adoption in BC right now. You can see we have pretty strong presence in the Fraser Valley, really strong presence out on the island, and then a smattering in other agricultural communities. Across Canada, we have about 900 farms. Literally a balancing act over there. I appreciate your dedication to the cause. So some of the things we didn't talk too much in depth, which are also captured in LiteFarm, are detailed cost of production data, records of BMP adoptions, so the tasks that you saw in there, right? You can correlate to the BMPs that you'd like to see farmers using. Qualitative and quantitative satisfaction ratings for BMPs. So you get that star rating. You also get any notes that the person doing an activity wanted to take. Whole farm sustainability indicators. So right now we have about 4. We'd like to expand that, right? But we're kind of waiting on groups like this that are the experts to tell us, you know, these are the 7 most important things that you can be showing to a farmer to make, you know, the next steps obvious. Multi-farm access, we looked at that, and then a million other things. And then if you could lift it up just a hair, we've got the summary thing at the bottom. There we go. And access to data from more than 300 farms in BC. Okay, so our roadmap this year is a researcher portal. We have 2 data science students that are working on this, essentially building all the queries, building a nice UI so that folks like yourselves can say, I'm interested in labor data in this polygon, you know, let me understand that, right? And we can spit it back out rather than right now, what happens is any of our collaborating researchers have to kind of describe in words what they're looking for. And then one of our data science interns spends a week trying to figure out how to like form the right query. So that's on the roadmap for this year. We're also going to add support for livestock and integrated cropping systems. So right now we're only doing crops, and we've had a lot of success with that, but on a regular basis, it's like, why can't I document my chickens? Why can't I document my livestock? We've been funded to build this, and what I would love to have, especially from the livestock folks in the room, is your advice on the best way to build this out, right? Because we've got what we do is we build resource groups of producers, scientists, etc. That essentially anytime we have a question like, does this make more sense? Does this make more sense? We can get quick feedback so that we're building the right things with our limited design and engineering abilities. And then the last thing that's on the roadmap is whole farm greenhouse gas calculations, right? And these are ideally via integrations with tools that are already doing that, such as Holos or Cool Farm Tool or Comet Farm. And then building out adding the most relevant sustainability indicators and sustainability, both environmentally, financially, et cetera, for farmers. So what are the ways you can collaborate with LiteFarm if anything I'm saying resonates or sounds interesting? The first one is, if we've already got what you need, awesome, talk to Hannah. She handles kind of the breadth and the intersection when it comes to researchers getting data. We don't commercialize any of the data right now. The license says that we will use the data in anonymized form in order to support research into agriculture. That's the only use of the data at present. If you're interested in something that's on our roadmap, please talk to me. I would love to include you in as many of those conversations as possible to make sure that we're building the right thing, right? To have an advisory group that that's saying like, yes, this makes sense, or no, I have no idea what you're trying to say with this thing. And then if you're not seeing what you need, talk to me. You know, we have a fairly diversified funding stream across grants, both provincial, federal, international. I would love to collaborate on a proposal with some of the folks in the room. You know, if it's something straight down the center of what LiteFarm is doing, that's fairly easy. If you think that we're focusing on the wrong things, we should be looking at something else. Convince me of that. We're definitely open source in both practice and soul. We want to incorporate anyone that's interested in building more value for farmers around the world. So with that, again, I'm Kevin Cusson. I'm here representing the LiteFarm team, which is a fantastic group of international individuals. Hannah is sitting at the back. She's a professor at UBC, and she's stewarding the access to a lot of the hundreds of thousands of records behind LiteFarm. And that's my cover here.
That's super interesting. Thank you for the overview. I can see so many ways that there's information being collected that would be very useful for the living lab. Are there questions from the group or the group online? Yeah, go ahead.
Just wondering the degree to which the tool can hold soil data. Obviously, it's a soil data
Yeah, great question.
conversation.
Right now, very
Yeah,
limited.
So to take information from a lab, right? So
Yeah.
both that a farmer could upload themselves or that a lab could back end interface to.
Yeah, so it's a great question. Where we are in that right now is we've essentially built out what that flow would look like for the farmer, right? Because there's kind of a multi-step process, right? Someone has to be assigned a task to go out and take a soil sample, right? After that, there would be a point where the sample, the results come back in, that needs to be updated. And then there could be a third step, you know, like Drew's presentation yesterday about like, how do you interpret that data, right? So we have not built that yet, but that's definitely a high priority. And I think that would be an excellent use case for collaboration with this group.
Yeah, great question.
And I was just gonna add to that, so we're part of a broader open agricultural technology ecosystem group, mainly in the US, and so they are working on kind of common data infrastructures to be able, they're working with labs, actually, all over the USA, to have a common upload format so that soil data coming from labs can be like portals into different kinds of programs like all about marriaging. So it's definitely been worked on, and it's just a matter of how do we do it and then what format for the group that happens.
Yes, Serena.
Yeah, so, my question throughout, you kind of answered it, was like, how is this kind of, how much forage and livestock and cattle thing would be relevant? I know there are other options out there, like my grazing and pasture map, but they're coming in at anywhere from $500 to $2,000 a year subscription rate.
Mhm.
So obviously the open source would be relevant, but there are pretty established tools and very specific for those sectors. So I was wondering if those have been looked at and kind of lessons learned from those existing technologies that are being adopted across Canada right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. We're aware of, you know, pasture maps, which you mentioned, you know, things like cattle maps, et cetera. We are going to liberally borrow some of their ideas to incorporate them to LiteFarm. I think the niche that we may have is when it comes to integrated cropping systems. You know, obviously that may improve, right? So they absolutely have a right to make a living and you know, pay their software engineers and their designers, et cetera. We are going to borrow the ideas that seem like they're good and they're enjoyed. And then I think we're going to try to more closely close the loop when it comes to the cropping systems. Yeah, I think we intend to use a lot of those features and then maybe things that don't align as well with the mission of LiteFarm, kind of leave those aside.
And yeah, I'm encouraged to reach out to the Canadian Forage and Grassland Association, because they've actually developed like national curriculum on advanced grazing management with the goal of actually creating some of these schools for producers and closing that gap. So I think that would be something that they'd be interested. vice chair of CFGA, so.
Can I reach out to you?
One of the many hats.
One of many hats. I probably don't have the capacity or the necessary detailed knowledge on that aspect of it. I'm definitely more on the forage than the livestock side of things. But I could see there being a desire to do that, and they're doing it nationally.
Yeah. That's something.
Shapai raises hand.
Go ahead, Shafay.
Oh, thanks. I'm just going to ask you about the data and how you handle it and who owns it and what kind of agreements you have with the farmers and what are you entitled to do it later. And you may have already answered this. I couldn't quite hear everything that was going on. So if you have, don't bother. Just we'll get it from some.
No, Shepta, that's a great question. Actually, later up, Sarah Louise, who's one of my colleagues, will be having a session related to that, which is going to be able to get into much more detail than I could during this Q&A. So can I ask you to be patient on that one?
Yeah, and I expect that, but I just wanted from your perspective, what, just at your level, not to get into the weeds. I know we're going to do that, but what do you see as the data? Do you encounter data ownership when you talk to farmers and do you have to have complicated agreements with them and that sort of thing?
So the way that we handle is we essentially have an end user license agreement, and that's available on GitHub in 4 languages. And I can point folks to this afterwards. I can send a link. The general spirit of the agreement is this: your data belongs to you as the farmer. If you want us to get rid of it, we will. Right now, the agreement is that we will not commercialize any data. That's not a sticking point that I hear from farmers typically. Typically, what I hear is, if you're going to sell it, I want to be part of the equation, right? I want a profit sharing agreement. But right now, we do not sell any data, and the data at present is only to support research into agriculture. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's a great start. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks.
The one sentence is if you don't agree to share your data, you can't use LiteFarm.
Yeah. Like many applications, if you say, I don't agree, then it's like, okay.
Yeah, so you sign up, there's a long data policy that you can read or click, I agree. But it basically says, this is the kind of data that we collect, this is how we handle it, this is where it's stored. It's under a UBC ethics agreement. We will only use it for research. If you want your data to be erased, please contact us. But otherwise, we will use it and we will always protect our privacy. They decide, and each time there's an update to the app, the user has to re-agree. So there's like ongoing consent. So every time Kevin publishes new features, then they have to re-agree. And that's the time at which you can say what's happening that's different. And then the farmer has a chance to like re-consent. But
When the
this
LiteFarm
one-
team publishes.
Yeah. It's just. This is using it as a benefit to the farmers. So they're using it to manage their farm. That's a benefit to them. And the cost that they pay is shared in their bill. It's not that we're coming to them for research and saying, use our product so we can research, it's like the other way around.
And the server is in Canada.
Yeah, it's AWS Ontario. I think.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Kevin. I know there's going to be more questions for you, and I heard you talking to people about their different tools and integration. So thank you so much.
Yes, so feel free to give it a try, litefarm.org. You can log in, you can create a farm. If you have any questions, feel free to come back and grab me. I'd be happy to do a quick impromptu demo.